Hi, and welcome to Spaminar, the Society of Prop Managers webinar series for live theater prop professionals. I'm Ben Homan, Vice President of SPAM and Props Director at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. The Society of Prop Managers, formerly and affectionately known as SPAM, was formed in 1994 by a small group of prop professionals in the Midwest to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production departments. Today, we're an association of over 150 plus prop professionals, prop managers, and educators from not-for-profit producing organizations, opera companies, and educational institutions. We've built an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and stock. As with previous Spaminars, we're requesting pay what you can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, links to donate will be in the chat. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We have enabled live transcriptions for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on the live transcript button on the bottom and then select Show Subtitle. Alternatively, you can click View Full Transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. If you have questions, please put them in the chat while Jim is talking, and we will ask them at the end. I'm joined tonight by Jim Guy, props designer, educator, and stage firearms coordinator and consultant to learn about firearm safety for the stage. Jim has been a member of SPAM for 30 years, of which 12 years were spent as president. Jim started his prop career years ago as part of the resident company of Cleveland Playhouse. Since then, his work has been seen on and off Broadway and in theaters across the country. He made a quick detour into the academic world for 7 years to run the Master of Fine Arts program in Theatrical Properties Management and Design at the University of Illinois at Champaign Urbana, before he returned to the true faith of professional theater as the Properties Director at Milwaukee Repertory Theater 26 years ago. Jim, I turn it over to you.
Okay, hi. Thank you very much for attending this. I know that there have been a lot of things in the news recently about this subject, so it's pretty clear that it is important to those of us who do this for a living to act as the guardians of our co-workers and our audiences and our crews. This is going to be the Cliff Notes version of a series of workshops and classes that I've taught over the last 30 years or so, which was the outgrowth of a class, a full semester class that I taught when I ran the MFA program at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I cannot stress enough how important this is to all of us as a health and safety issue, as well as a performance issue. The class and workshop covered the history of firearms and propellants, the mechanics of handguns and long guns, and the technical and artistic considerations that one needs to take into account when choosing guns and ammunition for the stage. Now, the technical considerations, they're pretty basic. First off, there's reliability. The loudest sound in the entire theater when a gun is supposed to go off is click. Gunfire on stage, nobody does it spuriously. There's no wee, yay, I'm a cowboy business going on there. It is always an enormous dramatic punctuation mark, and we rely on it to keep the story moving. We also rely on its acoustic impact, and we have to make that safe both for the performers and the crew, and especially for the audience who may or may not be expecting an explosion at that moment. Audience proximity, therefore, is a very big deal for us as well. Then there's blocking, cast proximity. Where can you and can you not put a performer so that they are completely and absolutely safe when gunfire happens on stage? There's the number of shots. Now this goes back to one of the reasons that the history part of this is important, because guns have not always been repeating arms necessarily, nor have they always been able to pop off 14 or 20 rounds in a couple of seconds. So you have to maintain historical accuracy at the same time as meeting the needs of the script. And then there's the most important thing, which is actor audience and crew safety. That's why we're here. Nobody's going to leave this seminar an expert on firearm safety for stage. Every time that I do a new show with another incident of gunfire in it, I learn something, and most often it's something good and something that will help us make this all work together. Today's focus, though, is going to be on policies and procedures for choosing blanks, blank firing weapons, and protocols dictating the safe use and handling in rehearsals, tech, and performance. First, I think we need to get a little nutsy boltsy on this. I won't go into history too much, but blanks, I know people often call them the bullets. They are not the bullets because there is no bullet tip on the shell casing. It is just a powder charge. That said, a powder charge can do as much damage as an actual bullet can in close proximity, and close proximity is what we're dealing with here in theater. Karen, could we take a look at the first slide, please? Yay, first slide. Okay, great. We'll be talking about two very basic kinds of blanks. In the first slide that we have here, you see blanks that the shell casing either comes to a point or it's flat on top. The ones that come to a point are crimped blanks, so that when that blank explodes, as you can see in the second slide, the crimp opens up and lets the propellant out. The second kind are wadded blanks. They have a piece of another material. That would be the ones with the flat tops, and the third one down on our second slide here. That one has a piece of cardboard in it. That is the most common wadding for wadded blanks. The advantage to the crimped blanks when we're dealing with those on stage is they're not throwing around the wadding, because the wadding can become a projectile. In the safety tests that we do and that I do in the course of the full length, which is about a 5-hour class, you can blow a hole through a piece of paper from a couple of feet, even 3 or 4 feet, with just the wadding. And the question you got to ask yourself is, how much thicker than that paper is my skin? The answer is not very much, guys. So wadding can be a dangerous projectile all by itself. Also, often it's caught on fire by the explosion, and so you are throwing flaming debris somewhere onto the set. So flame proofing of costumes, facial hair, and scenic elements is also often necessary. Can I see this? Let's see, number 10, crimped and wadded shells before and after discharge. And here we have, you can see before and after pictures of the crimped shell on the left-hand side of your screen before and after it is exploded. And that is what it is. It's an explosion. And a before and after of the wadded blank as well. Let's go to the next guy. And we're going to look at the heels, the rim of the shells. You can tell that the shell has been fired because of the little dent in the primer cap that sets off the main powder charge. That will tell you that the shell has been struck by the firing pin. It may or may not have gone off, but if there is a dent in that primer, that means that you're looking at a shell that was at least attempted to fire. The little guys with the green plastic wads that you see on the right-hand side there, that is a kind of a subspecies of wadded blanks. This is a plastic wad that actually stays with the blank. These are 8mm blanks, most commonly used in the semi-automatic and automatic blanks, blank firing weapons that are used on stage. Now, the disadvantage to these are that in order to run the action on a semi-automatic or an automatic weapon, you need a full powder charge. Otherwise, you have to have that gun altered so that it will accept a lesser charge by somehow restricting the backflow of the explosion inside the weapon, so that it'll a partial charge will create enough back pressure to run the slide and advance the next shell. You can see a before, during, and after on these shells. The undented is an unfired primer. The one that has just a little ding in it, that was a misfire. It was not struck on center or hard enough to set off that that shell. And the last one has a good solid hit on it. That one is safe to go. We use a number of propellants in the blank firing weapons. The two most often used are either gunpowder, which sort of resembles the granulated charcoal that they use in air filters and in fish tanks. It's very granular, and it has a very long burn when it's set off in the explosion that happens inside the gun. As a result, that stuff is discharged in one way or another and is still burning while it is traveling through the air, making it less than ideal, especially in close quarters. The gun, or the propellant that is most often used on stage is a flash powder, which is it's like dust, honestly, and it's also it's got a significant magnesium content to the propellant. It is consumed much closer to the source of ignition, that is the gun, than gunpowder is, so that you can use it in much closer quarters. And in my experience also, it equal amounts of gunpowder and flash powder. The flash powder appears to be louder as well, so you can use less of it and still get a good bright flash and a very satisfying report. So the next thing we have to take into consideration is the direction of the exhaust. There's an explosion in there, and if it's a completely closed system, it's a pipe bomb. You don't want that, right? Okay, fine. So it has to go somewhere. The first slide that we're looking at here is a front exhaust weapon. Now that's a real gun. That is it was a Milwaukee police officer's sidearm in the 1980s and early 90s until they went to semi-automatics. But that is the way that all front exhaust weapons will throw powder, and if it's a wadded blank, wadding as well, so that it acts just like a gun. The thing in the most danger in that situation is the thing straight ahead of the gun. And so that's not always applicable or something that you need to use in stage combat. The second one, which we're looking at, and is now, I believe, on the left side of the screen, is a top exhaust. There are combinations of top and front exhaust also, but generally that exhaust will go up out of the frame of the gun. Terrific for the shooter, terrific for the person in front of the gun, but if you happen to be aiming like to fire a warning shot, you got to get that way above your head because of the direction of the exhaust. You might be shooting yourself in the temple. The next slide shows side exhaust, which has been the most typical, generally speaking, of stage firearms up until recent developments. Now, the first one, the one that has an odd-looking frame, that's the archetype for all of these guys. It's an athletic starter pistol. The exhaust on that goes out to the sides. So shooter and the person being shot at, theoretically, are probably the safest people in the room. But if there are people or audience members on either side of them in close enough proximity, those are the folks in danger. There are also differences in the physical makeup of the guns, and though the mechanics are similar, there is for instance, the top exhaust and the side exhaust, generally speaking, have completely blocked barrels. And so that's why they have exhausts in different directions, because you want to avoid that pipe bomb factor. What we're looking at now is the cylinder from that Milwaukee police officer's gun on the left-hand side that has a straight through shot of the chambers in the cylinder. That would definitely chamber a live round if one were to get into the theater somehow. The next one that we're looking at is a restricted cylinder that will not chamber a live round, because it is far too the depth of the chamber is far too shallow to fit a live round in. In front exhaust guns, often there is both a restricted cylinder and also a restriction built into the barrel of the gun to keep, well, if you're using wadding, it's to break up wadding. If not, it is just to minimize the amount of issue that comes straight out of the front of the gun and toward wherever that gun is being pointed. I'm dealing mostly here in revolvers. There are also, as I mentioned, semi-automatic blank guns. Now, as I said, the semi-automatic blank guns, for the most part, fire an 8mm ammunition with the plastic wad that stays with the gun, so it doesn't gum up the works of the semi-automatic. The problem with those, though, are that though they are more affordable, or the blank guns are more affordable than guns that you can get that are semi-automatics that have been converted to blank fire only, the affordability is offset by the fact that you can only use the full 8mm round in those guns. And so acoustically, they're probably far too loud for most performance situations. The revolvers are more affordable and often more reliable also. I will not go into what it takes to clear a jam in a semi-automatic gun, but boy, can it put the brakes on a scene all of a sudden if what you need right now is gunfire. So front exhaust, top exhaust, side exhaust, it's your choice depending on what the blocking is for your scene. Whether there's a restricted cylinder or an unrestricted cylinder will be affected by your ammunition choice, and whether a blocked or restricted barrel is necessary. That is the very, very basics of it. There's a lot more to it than that, but you know, you're smart people, and you can figure this out. So the thing that I want to lean into most at this time is the policies and procedures for choosing, using, and running blank firing guns on stage with blank ammunition. In preparation, one of the things you need to be most careful about is to notify security and building operations of the approximate time and amount of gunfire in upcoming rehearsals and performances. This means you have to be in close tune with your stage management staff so that you can get the word out on all of that, especially, and I will say in this day and age, about 102 times during this brief presentation, but it's the truth. It used to be you heard loud bangs coming from somewhere in the building. Your first thought was not active shooter. Now we are conditioned to think active shooter, and so you need to do everything that you can to protect the sanctity of the rehearsal hall or the technical process, the technical rehearsal process, so that you don't have any police action or citizens calling the police. Everybody has to know about this. Notify house management that there is gunfire in a production. Notify occupants of neighboring spaces when gunfire will occur in tests, rehearsals, and performances. I spent the last 24 years at Milwaukee Repertory Theater, and one of our performance spaces, the lobby went directly into the lobby of an office building and a hotel. And so we had to make sure that security was well aware if we had guns going off in rehearsal or performance, or if we were doing tests in the space, so that they wouldn't think that there was real gunfire going on, because that could have ended in tragedy. I worked in a theater with a little black box. It was a university theater, and a little black box theater that the stage right exit actually exited into a hallway outside of the theaters. Many of you have worked in this kind of place. Now, there were black drapes up and all that, so that you didn't see people running on and off stage. But one night, there was a substitute security guard working the late shift when gunfire went off on stage, and no one had told this security guard that that was going to happen. In the course of an actual scene with an audience in the house, the stage right door of this little theater burst open, and a security guard charged onto stage, getting ready to pull their sidearm because they had heard gunfire. Very, very luckily, they realized, lights, audience, people in costume, this isn't the real thing. Could have ended in tragedy. More so now than ever, we have to be very careful that everybody knows that there's going to be gunfire in a place that adjoins any public space. You also have to check with local law enforcement regarding laws and restrictions. Firearms laws are all over the map. What is legal nationally may not be legal in your state, may not be legal in your suburb or city, may not be legal on your campus or in the building that you're working. So you've got a lot of ground to cover to find about whether or not this stuff is legal where you're doing it. Arrange for posting and or announcement of an audience warning that there will be gunfire in a production. I have received pushback from directors who wanted gunfire to be a surprise. You'll be giving it away. There are people with PTSD out there. There are people who can be triggered by unexpected loud noises. There's a lot of stuff going on that simply was never taken into consideration in years past, that we are now very sensitive to, and rightfully so. And we need to give those people a warning. Then there's folks like me and my dad who are wearing 2 hearing aids. My dad always had seats right down front in the theater so that he could hear the performers as well as see them when he was subscribing to the Cleveland Playhouse. If he wasn't warned that there was going to be gunfire in a show, and he had his hearing aids cranked up real loud so he could hear every syllable, it could really have been damaging. So it is very important that that happen. I know that the house managers at Milwaukee Rep, we have an agreement with them that when they take the ticket, they not only say the play takes this long and there is 1 intermission, but they also say there is gunfire in Act 2. That's as much as they do, but it's as much as needed. Also, when there's a lot of gunfire, like in a show like Assassins, for instance, we posted warnings on the seats in the first couple of rows that these people were going to be very, very close to active blank gunfire. Now, why that would come as a surprise to someone who is going to see Assassins, I can't tell you, but the truth is that not everybody picks up on that stuff, and you have to do your very best to warn them. Arrange with stage management to schedule a dedicated firearms training rehearsal. This can't be like shoehorned in. We'll be back for break. From break, and then we're going to give you 10 minutes, and then you got to get out because we've got to run this other scene. It has to be a dedicated bit of firearms training rehearsal so that you can have time with the actors and with stage management to get them familiar with what they're using, how they're going to be using it, and what might or might not be changes that you need to make in what you felt was proper procedure in order to accommodate actors' needs, fears, and the realities of blocking with firearms on stage. You wouldn't have to think that you need to tell people this, but you really do. Read the play and talk with the director to prepare for informed selection of period and style of the weapon and proper ammunition selection. Every once in a while, I have had someone come to me for advice on picking a firearm, and I have asked them a lot of questions about this, and they can't always answer what the blocking's like or what year does your play take place in, and it throws a wrench into it very quickly. You have to do tests. This is our last two slides, Karen. And these are really crappy photos taken some years ago during a workshop that I was leading. But what you need to do to find out what the assured safe distance from the gunfire will be is hang up a single piece of thin paper like newsprint and unbacked so that you could poke your finger straight through it, and then figure out from the blocking that you have seen and talking to stage managers and the directors and the actors, everybody needs to get involved in this, how far they think the shooter is going to be from the target. Lay out a tape measure on the floor that will tell you how far, not from your feet, but from your arm extended with the gun in your hand, how far from the muzzle of the gun the intended target is going to be. Then give yourself a few feet back. I usually mark it off in 2 foot increments. Get the gun that you intend to use, get the ammunition that you intend to use into the gun, and start firing in roughly 2 foot increments, inspecting the paper after each shot to see if there is any powder damage to the paper, if there are any specks of powder hanging onto the paper, not going through it, but just hanging onto it, or whether the paper has actually been penetrated by either the explosion or by the propellant. There are things in gunpowder and flash powder that are corrosive and can cause powder burns. These are chemical burns. They're not just from the actual burning of the powder. It is actually that chemical being driven into your skin, and then a chemical reaction happens with the moisture in your skin that can be extremely painful. On top of that, the movement of air can do as much damage as the explosion can. If you ever, this is the side view, in case you have a side exhaust gun, and you can see that the paper has become very unhappy with the proximity of that explosion. Once again, how much thicker than that paper is your skin? Not very much. But that is in part a product of not just the explosion, but the concussion. If you've ever been to a club or a concert where you can actually feel the bass line on your body, that is a very subdued version of the fast and very violent air movement that happens when you produce an explosion, a contained explosion, but an explosion all the same with the blank in the blank firing gun. The little hairs in your ear and the little bones in your inner ear can be destroyed by that fast. If there's the, I don't know, have you, if you've ever had the martial arts move where somebody slaps you on the ears, I do not recommend it. You see stars, you lose your balance, you can't hear, the ringing is deafening. That is all air movement, not the actual gunpowder that is happening, but the air movement. So you've got to be incredibly careful about how much of that the actors and the audience are absorbing at the time of ignition. So that's the paper test. You also need to do an acoustic test in the space with the set up to determine an acceptable volume level. A set, if you're in a box set, it's a band shell. It's going to go throwing all the sound out into the house. If you're in a fly house that is not a box set, the house, the fly loft and the wings are going to absorb a lot of that sound. So the sound of a shot upstage of the proscenium line and the same shot with the same ammunition downstage of the proscenium line can be entirely different. I have actually had a double-barreled shotgun that was rigged for blank fire only that was supposed to be fired upstage of the proscenium line and then again downstage of the proscenium line. And I had to use two entirely different charges, a full charge for upstage and a half charge for downstage, so that it would sound to the audience like it was the same amount of explosion going on. So you've got to test all of that business in the space with the set up. And then it's probably going to change at least moderately when you get an audience in all those seats. Those bodies are going to absorb sound too. So you have to be ready to change ammunitions all the way up through public previews when you find out what's really going on with the report of the guns that you're using on stage. Inspection by a licensed gunsmith of any actual previously uninspected firearm introduced into the production at any point. This should include any real firearm that has been mechanically altered to only accept and fire blank ammunition. A lot of gunsmiths simply will refuse to test or maintain blank firing guns, guns that have been built for blank fire only. They refer to them as noisemakers, and mostly for liability reasons. Their liability insurance does not cover blank guns, and so if a blank gun starts to pull up lame on you for some reason, they're not so expensive that you shouldn't just replace them. I know a lot about how guns work. I know a lot about how blank guns work, but I am not going to try to do work on a gun. That is the job of a gunsmith. And if you can't get a gunsmith to deal with your blank firing weapons, retire those weapons, make them the gun that gets thrown across the room or dropped to the ground. In rehearsal, attend early blocked rehearsals of scenes involving gunfire to help determine the type of weapon and ammunition required. Provide physically accurate rehearsal props for weapons and for carriers to prepare the actors for the physical realities of carrying and handling guns. Though it's nice that you've got a squirt gun that's the right size and shape as the gun you're going to be using, the weight of that is going to have an effect on how the performer handles the gun and how they store the gun too. I have often worked with costumers when I find out that a gun is supposed to be tucked into a waistband or in the pocket of a jacket, to see if the garment will actually support the weight of the blank firing weapon. Sometimes it just won't. And as a result, you've got to make other arrangements for handling, storing, or wearing that gun. Also, shoulder holsters. Shoulder holsters are meant to keep a gun secure to the actor's body, or to, in real life, to the gun handler's body, so that they can go about everyday business and extraordinary business like climbing a fence or something like that. They are not meant to issue a gun into your hand when you need it. So an actor has to get used to the fact that there is effort involved in getting a gun out of a serving shoulder holster. Communicate with costumes regarding how a weapon will be carried and its compatibility with the costume. I use James Bond as a reference for this. The Walther PPK is not a particularly powerful or at longer ranges accurate weapon, but it will not screw up the look of a tuxedo, which I think is probably why it is a popular gun with James Bond. But if it's in a shoulder holster, there's going to be a lump. If it's in a back of the pants holster, the actor is going to have to be able to get past the garment to get that. If it's in a pocket, you have to make sure that it's not going to get hung up on the garment, or otherwise what is supposed to be a threatening moment could turn into inadvertent comedy. If possible, prepare for a live fire rehearsal time before tech. That is a time when the actors are not acting their roles, but are there in the house or even on the stage with you, so that you can test the weapon and they can see how much exhaust, how much of a muzzle flash or side or top flash is happening, and what it sounds like there in the space. Having them trying to act at the same time as to make these discoveries is simply unfair to the performer. Actors have one of the, if not the hardest job in theater. They're up there. They're wearing somebody else's clothes, somebody else's shoes, and maybe somebody else's hair. They're walking around in a way that somebody else told them to walk around, saying somebody else's words in somebody else's accent. And then you're going to ask them to pull and fire a gun while all this other stuff has to be in their head, including the fact that they have to be in a particular spot on the stage on a particular syllable. If anything in that mix screws that up, you are turning what should be beautiful human chess into potential human pinball, and it's not going to work. So having them as well prepared as possible to deal with the realities of live fire before they get into the scene, is you're doing nothing but doing them and yourself a huge favor. Prepare for the event of weapon or ammunition failure with alternate dialogue, blocking, and backup weaponry or action. Now, this could be the dreaded recorded shot. It could be an offstage shot in the general area fired by a crew member to mask the fact that the gun has not gone off. I have had at one point, and I believe that it was a production of Sleuth. I always get Sleuth and Death Trap mixed up, because as far as I can tell, they're plays about each other. But I think that it's Sleuth that there are 5 shots that must go off in order to end the act. And the shots also trigger special effects of one sort or another in the course of it. And if there is any misfire, the act's dead before it's over. As a result, and because to some extent the play is about deadly gamesmanship, we were actually able to hide backup weapons in various places in the room and prepare the actors with bits of dialogue that made it possible to carry the scene off as effectively as you can, rather than just bringing things to a screeching halt. Teach actors what to do in the event of a jam or a misfire. That's another reason that I prefer cylinder-driven weapons, is because unless it's catastrophic mechanical failure on the part of the gun, you are holding 3, 5, even 7 backup shots right there in your hand. In the event of clearing a jam in a semi-automatic weapon, sometimes the amount of stuff you've got to go through includes dropping the magazine from the gun, clearing the jam, putting the magazine back in, reinserting a shell into the breech, and then firing. That's a long time if you're trying to get a scene moving with gunfire in it. Determine which scenic and costume elements should be treated with flame retardant, and then educate actors, staff, and crew regarding the benefits of hearing protection and demonstrate methods by which the effects of gunfire on the ears can be minimized. Hearing protection has come a long way. It's not just little foam plugs that you put in your ears anymore. There are plugs that are built for musicians and for shooters that can let the human voice in very serviceably and are almost invisible, and now even come in the same colors as all of our actors. So there's no real reason why you should put your hearing in danger. And this goes for the crew as well. If you don't have to, then offstage and onstage, treat all weapons as if they are real and as if they are loaded. No exceptions. Don't care if it's an inert piece of plastic or a gun carved out of soap or something that you believe to be unloaded. No exceptions. I'm sorry, but ask Alec Baldwin, okay? That wasn't supposed to be a real bullet, and it probably shouldn't even have been a blank if he was pointing it in the direction of another human being. We will now not go any further into this. No weapon should ever be set on a prop table or in a dressing room. All unattended weapons and ammunition should be stored in a locked container in a secure area. You can't leave things like this out where anybody but the person issuing it and using it can get to it. Things walk away from backstage all the time. You guys know that. You don't want it to be a replica of a real firearm. Excuse me a sec. Like my mighty thirst. If firearms to be transported between spaces or locations, they should be carried in secure containers and not visible to anyone. That is, like rifle cases, lock boxes, road boxes, etc. No weapon should be carried in plain view. Never carry a weapon in the passenger compartment of a motor vehicle. If there's a traffic stop, look at the news. You are looking at very potentially serious consequences. Store weapons and ammunition in separate locked containers. Unload and clean all weapons before storage. Appoint a designated firearms master responsible for issuing, collecting, loading, cleaning, maintaining, and storing and inventorying all weapons and ammunition in a production. One person or two people's jobs, and they have to have the same job every performance, every rehearsal, so that they are familiar with that machine. You know, when your computer or your screw gun or your sewing machine or any machine that you use regularly, you can tell when something's odd, when something's a little off. If these duties pass from person to person, night after night, you're not going to be able to track down a potential problem before it happens. And you need to be busy to catch a note before it becomes a note when it comes to something that is potentially deadly or injurious. The actor has the right to witness the loading of the weapon. Look at the news. A live weapon should be issued by the firearms master to the actor carrying it on stage at the last convenient time before their entrance, and it should be collected as soon as they leave the stage. It should be returned to lockup and loaded at the first available opportunity. When a weapon is issued, the firearms master should notify the recipient of the type of gun and load being issued, as well as any other pertinent information. 9mm Taurus with half loads, safety on. Especially when you are dealing with replica weapons at the same time that you are dealing with guns that have blank loads in them. Sometimes this can save trouble, confusion, and possible injury. The recipient should make eye contact with the issuer of the weapon, and to signal that they have control of the gun, say thank you. The person issuing the gun should not release the weapon until they have heard this signal. I have seen little tug of wars backstage because, like I said, actors have a lot going in there, especially before an entrance. That said, this needs to be the focus at that particular moment. Weapons should be cleaned and inspected following every performance. If you got a 2-show day, you should probably do a dry cleaning, that is just with brush and patches of the weapon. At the end of the day, after the final performance, a wet cleaning with a powder solvent. The reason for this is that many, if not most, powder solvents have a flammable ingredient in them as solvents. And if you don't give that a chance to off gas and dissipate, just like if you've ever filled a liquid fuel lighter, like a Zippo lighter, and then you light it, and the flame not only travels out the wick, but it also catches the inside of the lid of the lighter because of residue from the lighter fluid. This stuff acts the same as the lighter fluid and can leach out onto the surfaces of the gun. So, but if left to off gas, it's gone. Offstage shots and backup shots. Offstage shots are subject to the same safety rules and tests that apply to onstage shots, including considerations for powder exhaust, hearing and eye protection, and bystander proximity. An offstage shot should be fired by a crew member, not a cast member. An offstage shot offstage shots are often fired in close proximity to scenic elements, so adequate fire and spark protection should be employed. Because of the acoustic differences between an offstage shot fired near the playing area and a shot fired on stage, extensive testing is necessary to achieve the desired sonic effect. You may have to use an entirely different gun and an entirely different blank charge in order for it to sound moderately convincing. Depending on proximity to stage, a flash barrier may be necessary to mask the shot's place of origin and help to make it more convincing. If using a semi-automatic weapon for the offstage shot, provision should be made to contain or direct the ejected cracks. In general, never dry fire, that is fire, pull the trigger on an empty chamber. Guns are made to very specific machinery tolerances in their springs and how far the hammers and firing pins are supposed to throw. Every time you do that without a shell in the chamber is one time on stage that it may simply not work for you. No horseplay, no cowboy crap. It is uncalled for. These things are dangerous, you know, but they are a tool that we use to make a play work. And just like other tools, like a table saw, they are noisy, they are dangerous, and if used wrong, they can kill you. The big advantage to a table saw is you can't put it in your pocket and take it to a church or a bar or a school. No gun, real or simulated, should be pointed toward the audience. It is a serious violation of safety protocols and puts our audience, cast, and crew at risk. Any number of reasons. And I have been asked on a number of occasions by directors who really should have known better that a plant in the audience rise, walk into the center aisle, pull a gun and fire at the guy on stage. You can't do that. People with hearing aids, people with pacemakers, people with flammable tattoos, people who are lawyers, the potential liability, both physical and legal, for having a shot fired unannounced in proximity to audience members is incalculable. Keep your finger outside the trigger guard until you are ready to pull the trigger. No handling or discharge of a firearm except in a training situation or when actually involved in rehearsal or a performance. Anyone involved in the production has the right and the obligation to halt any action they believe to be unsafe in the course of any rehearsal, tech, or in a performance. Use dummy or duplicate weaponry in any scene in which a live weapon is not necessary. There are really great replicas that are so good that close up, it is difficult to tell the difference between that and the gun that fires. When a real weapon is necessary but is not fired, it should be unloaded or loaded with dummy rounds. And real firearms should only be altered or adapted by a qualified gunsmith or armor. Those are my policies and procedures. I think, well, we're running low on time. I know that we are also going to put up my contact information at some point. So if you have a question or you are interested in having me give the full class, you can contact me directly. But now I think it's time to turn it back to Ben, our moderator.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. So first off, Jim, should a prop person be concerned if a company is using a blank firearm without a certified fight choreographer being involved?
It depends on the experience of the prop people and whether or not they are qualified or familiar enough with stage firearms to help make some of those judgment calls. Also, I have discovered that many of the fight choreographers with whom I have worked in past, although this is far less true these days, has not been trained on firearms necessarily. They've been trained on bladed weapons. They've been trained in hand-to-hand, but not necessarily on the internal workings. I much prefer it when there's a fight choreographer, but also the fight choreographer isn't always on deck all the time, whereas if the prop person is familiar with the firearms, then they can be on call at all times at the theater.
Okay. Someone has heard that having your mouth open while firing a blank will help relieve some pressure from the ears. Is there any merit to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that, being semi-deaf myself. Firearms for stage, power tools in tiny little brick prop shops, and rock and roll. Joe Walsh is primarily responsible, I think. But you know how if you're going up in a plane or you're going down a steep hill with the windows open in a car and you want to pop your ears, you do, or that helps to equalize, though not eliminate, the tremendous change in air pressure that I was talking about, the concussion that happens when the air pressure is slammed into your head by the explosion. Now, looking like you're yawning or holding your nose is not necessarily good for the scene. But if you give a sharp exhale through your nose at the very moment that the gun is fired, it can be helpful. It will not do the same quality job as having good ear protection. Earplugs inserted into your ears to help ameliorate both the volume and the air movement.
Okay.
So it's a yes and no answer, I'm afraid.
Good information though. Would it be beneficial for artisans and or prop managers to get combat certified?
Oh, yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, when I was running the MFA program at U of I often worked to have all of my prop majors take the stage combat course from the certified instructor so that they could be certified. There's no such thing as too much information in props, and especially when you're dealing with potentially deadly props. So not only is it good for the firearms end of things, but also you're invariably going to run into bladed weapons situations and hand-to-hand situations that you are going to be asked to participate in. And so the more information, the better.
Okay, great. And Kevin has put several things in the chat that people can read about some of those things, some training from SAFD, things like that. Another person asked, should blank firing guns or simulators be used in the rehearsal space or only once the show moves into the theater?
I like to keep them out of the rehearsal space because the rehearsal space is really never set up to accommodate the volume or perhaps even the distance by which you can separate stage management and director from the gunfire. I like to have the live fire demonstration in a space that is more acoustically suitable and then have dedicated tech time to working on the gunfire.
Great. And Greg asked that they had always been under the impression that just because someone is certified fight choreographer, that does not mean that they have knowledge of an armorer and they should not be treated as an expert when it comes to firearm safety. Should they continue to operate under that assumption? You've kind of already mentioned this, and Kevin also mentioned.
I kind of already mentioned that, and the SAFD has done a really terrific job of training the up and coming fight directors in the recent past. It honestly depends on the person and what their training has been.
Okay, great.
And you should find that out. If you're hiring a fight choreographer for a show that has significant gunfire, it's incumbent on you to investigate that before you put somebody under contract.
Right. Great. Sunny asks, and someone else follows up, do you have a recommended place to purchase weapons, say for stage, and places to purchase blanks?
The weapons vendors are kind of all over the map, depending on what kind of a gun you're looking for. So there are lots of online vendors. That said, most of the guns that you get online are made by the same 4 or 5 manufacturers. And you should ask people who have dealt with this brand of gun if it will serve your needs. I have a preferred blank guy that I've been working with for, nearly 30 years now. There are others I know, but I've stuck with the same guy because I have a really great working relationship with Joe Swanson at Joe Swanson's Motion Picture Blanks out of Kingman, Arizona. And it's Joe Swanson's motionpictureblanks.com, one long lowercase run-on word. Joe has loaded all kinds of blanks in all kinds of load, from full loads, half loads, quarter loads, primer only loads, if that's appropriate for your purposes, and some pretty esoteric caliber of guns for some rarities that I have employed on stage. So my preferred vendor is Joe Swanson. And if you do give Joe a call, tell him I said, hey.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on airsoft guns?
They look great. They look really terrific. That works. The weight is better than a squirt gun, but not as good as a gun that is an all metal construction. And let's talk about the all metal construction for a second too. Most blank guns are not made of steel. Most often they are made out of a softer metal, often cast zinc. That stuff is soft. It breaks. If you drop a gun made out of cast zinc repeatedly, it's going to pull up lame on you at some point, because parts will bend and get out of line, so that the advance of the cylinder may not work properly. The firing pin may not strike the primer of the shell properly. So it's something to beware of.
Okay, I'm going to follow up. Are solid rubber guns closer in weight and safer to drop?
They're certainly safer to drop. They can be somewhat closer in weight, and you can add weight to them. You can drill out a barrel or a grip or something like that and add lead shot in a pour plastic or something like that to get the right weight.
Okay, great. This has kind of been answered a little bit in the chat, but can you share a little info about certification? Is there anything outside of SAFD or other things that you would recommend people look into?
I don't know that there is any other. Kevin can probably answer this better than I. I don't know that there is any other certification program that deals specifically with firearms use on stage, and it is different. Sometimes a college or a theater will contact me and say, how much does it cost to have you come in and do your full 5-6 hour workshop? And I will tell them, and usually one of the bean counters will come back and say, well, can't we just get like law enforcement or the NRA to come in and do a workshop? And my answer to that is, if your intention is to teach people to shoot real guns, theoretically at real people, yes. But if you have to take all of this other stuff into account, blocking and acoustics and audience proximity and cast proximity and so on, you need someone, SAFD or somebody like me, that specializes in firearms for stage, not real guns. There are remarkable similarities, yes. There are a lot of crucial differences, though.
Great. That answers pretty much all of the questions. So, oh, there's one more. Is purchasing vintage firearms from pawn shops or individuals and having a gunsmith alter them for blanks a bad idea?
Not necessarily. The gunsmith will need to tell you whether or not the gun is really serviceable and reliable. And you should only use a gunsmith who has experience in converting real guns to blank fire only guns. I know I have a gunsmith that Joe Swanson has used frequently to do this, and they are well versed in what the requirements are and what the dangers are for that sort of thing. But knocked over my water bottle. And so yeah, they should have experience in doing this. I have talked to some gunsmiths who just don't want to deal with it, again, for liability reasons. Perfectly understandable. So you have to find the right gunsmith and the right gun to do this too. Otherwise, you may be working at cross purposes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Jim, for an informative evening on a very important topic that we all should be aware of. And thank you all for attending. Now it's time to get out your Sharpies and mark your calendars with information on our upcoming seminars. On April 16th, Eric Hart will be presenting on animatronics. On May 21st, Nikki Kulis will be presenting on puppet building. And on June 18th, we'll be talking health and wellness for props with the SPAM Anti-Oppression Committee. If you are interested in joining SPAM and are a working prop manager, director, supervisor, master, or some similar title in a nonprofit theater, opera company, or children's theater, or are an educator who teaches prop classes to prepare students for a career in props, please visit our website or click the link in the chat to fill out our membership form. And Jim Guy will probably email you with more information. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links should be in the chat. Spaminar is produced by the Society of Prop Managers, with special thanks to SPAM members Patrick Drone, Freed, Larry Heyman, Ben Homan, Stacey Horn Harper, Nikki Kulis, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, and Karen Robbie Vance. Thanks again for watching, and once again, please keep your suggestions for future Spaminars coming in the survey that is probably in your inbox as we speak. We want to know what you want to learn about. Prop on, and we'll see you next time.